Welcome back, viewers. Those of you who have just joined us, we have been debating the EU referendum with our special guest, Mr. Paul Scully, MP. So let's start once again, Paul. Going back to the previous issue, you said we look at the India, look at the China, how they are progressing. My question will be to you now. We are together, European strength is together, but still we cannot compete with China or India. They're the bigger giant, economic giant in this world. They're one of the biggest exporter to this world. And China is the second economy in the world now. So we are together, we cannot compete with them. When we will be divided, we will be coming out of EU, which means our power will be lessened. We will be a little bit weaker. So how would you expect yourself to compete with those giants like China and India?
I think what we need to do, the problem is we're not, the EU is not a country. It's not a single entity. There's 28 separate member states that are trying to fight for their own interests. So we're trying to negotiate a free trade deal with Australia. That is actually being held up by Italian tomato growers. Very specific issue. We're trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with Canada. That's being held up because of Romanian visas, something totally random. So but by being the UK, with the 5th largest economy, as I was saying, dealing with China, we have individual interests that we can say, right, these are ours, what are your issues? And let's get together and sort them out. So we can do it a lot quicker, a lot nimbler, which is why, as I say, in business, small businesses can compete well with large businesses in many forums because we actually have the agility and being nimble enough to be able to make decisions quickly and sharply and very focused as well, which the EU isn't really able to do.
So let's be clear here. Are you saying that because we are the bloc of 28 countries, part of EU, we cannot negotiate with a part of the world or country because we have to think of other 27 countries?
I think look at what's happening.
And when we are on our own, it's more freedom in our hand to make a deal whoever we want to. This is the case.
I can give you a specific example. The EU has free trade agreements with countries around the world, 50, 52, something like that, that's worth about, the market is worth about $4.2 trillion. Sounds like quite a lot of money. Chile, a lot smaller economy and country than we have, never mind the EU, has access to $40 trillion market. Okay. So even Chile, as a small country, has far more access to free trade around the world than we do as the UK, and certainly the EU does. Bearing in mind, of course, that either way, we can still trade with the country. We still trade with China. We still trade with these other countries. It's the free trade. It's just getting the tariffs down that is why it's important to have free trade. But we can still trade nonetheless.
For example, the country like Thailand, they have an excellent amount of export any other part of the world, but they are not part of the EU or anything at all. So, which is, you can do business and do better without being part of the EU.
I believe so. I believe so. If you look at the boss of JCB, the people that make the big diggers, that obviously we're doing a lot of construction at the moment, a very important business, he will tell you that it's actually, he believes it's cheaper for him to sell his products to America, where they have tariffs, so they charge him extra for selling them there, and it's cheaper to do that than actually spend time and money on the regulations that he has to pay into Europe, despite the fact there being no tariffs. So you have to balance one against another. But at the end of the day, all of this trade is hugely important and it affects our prosperity. But as I came back from the beginning, so much of it is about decision making and it's about identifying ourselves and holding our head up high as a country.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Now, if I bring attention to these, before the general election in 2015, Prime Minister referendum. Is it because it was a threat from UKIP to your party? You're losing MPs from your party to UKIP because of EU referendums. It wasn't much of a demand from the public, British public. It was inside your party who was talking about talking about EU and the problem and everything, and we had a problem with EU keep was stealing off your MPs. Is this because he promised this referendum? Now is he regretting now he has promised this referendum?
Well, you'll have to ask him if he's regretting it, but I mean there's obviously it is something, the question of Europe is something that's been with the Conservatives, and we've been debating it for many years now, since the 90s. But I know when I was going around in the last year in the election, immigration was actually the biggest issue that I found on the doorstep in South London, where I'm a Member of Parliament for. And actually, whereas you could have said a year before that Europe wasn't particularly a big issue, it was only as people realised, as the debate progressed further, that people realised that there is an issue with the EU and not being able to control immigration as a whole, because they're one arm tied behind their back, that people started to realise that actually Europe was possibly the key to unlock the immigration control and the fairer immigration system that I've been talking about. So I think people have really become more grateful that there's a referendum. And I know a couple of years ago there was a poll that said 80% of people, no matter which side of the debate they stood, wanted to have their say on our future relationship with Europe. And whatever happens, this is a decision that's going to be a long-term decision, so it's a hugely important one. And it's important that we're having debates and discussions like we're having today, because there's a lot of information and assumptions that people are going to have to weigh up for June the 23rd.
So if I can ask you this, this EU free movement wasn't since 2004, is it? There wasn't much of a problem of immigration before 2004. Is this because the new countries has joined EU and their citizen wants to come and work somewhere better than their own countries?
I think that's largely it. And as we've expanded, and funny enough, my government, my party, was in favour of expansion of Europe to take in more states. The reason that they wanted to do that, because they were the theory was they wanted to dilute the effect of France and Germany as the big two countries that were dictating everything that was being done in Europe by bringing other states in. But of course that's had unintended consequences of those people with weaker economies, where wages are a lot lower, being able to come over here seeking jobs. So that has caused the infrastructure issues that I was talking about in terms of pressure on school places, on houses and these sort of things. Of course it's brought benefits as well. They are doing jobs that British people weren't wanting to do. So as I said right at the beginning, immigration is not a bad thing. It's just about getting the balance right.
Thank you, Paul. Now, can I ask you, the Prime Minister negotiation, has it achieved anything at all?
In my mind, not really. So there are two essential things that the Prime Minister secured. Part of it was about benefits and in-work benefits for immigrants, but coming from the EU. But in reality, he came up and said, you know what, we don't want anybody to be able to claim any in-work benefits for 4 years, first 4 years. That got diluted. He then said, I don't want child benefit, because we have this odd thing that child benefit can be paid to children living in other countries, which is, it's odd. If you've got a taxpayer here that's effectively paying for a child living in Poland,
somewhere
Spain,
else,
or something like that. And that even hasn't been solved. And the other side of it was about the political side of things. So the fact that we don't want to be moving towards ever closer union, political union, this idea of the EU being a single country. Now,
United States of Europe.
Yes, exactly. And there's been some fine words by the European Commission, but none of this is firm. None of it's legally binding. So what I suspect will happen is that if we vote to remain, this will be all nice pat on the back, and the EU will actually know what they need to promise us in order to keep us happy, and they'll carry on their merry way in moving towards that United States of Europe.
Thank you, Paul. So, main point on this negotiation was gaining some power back for our parliament. Has he gained any power back?
I've certainly seen nothing as a member of that parliament. I've seen nothing that's coming back to me or as one of the representatives or to the government. We have this thing called the red card. So we're supposed to be able to work with other countries to override and veto legislation that's coming through, but that's actually sets a higher bar than the current system, the so-called orange card. We now need to find more countries to agree with us to be able to block any legislation, which seems to have moved in the opposite direction rather than benefiting us. So it's those kind of things I don't think people have really worked out.
It is very complicated, isn't it?
It's hugely complicated.
Because you are not, you haven't got full freedom.
No.
Because if you don't or can't make own legislation for your own people, you have to, or the legislation will be overruled by another part of the world.
So it's hugely complicated. If you, I can't even, we haven't got time for me to go through the whole of the European legislation. I can't pretend to understand it totally myself. But you effectively have the European Commission, a set of people that we appoint. Each of the countries have one person that they appoint. They propose legislation. They're the only people that can propose legislation. You have the Council of Ministers, the Prime Ministers and the leading
European
ministers
Commission,
come in.
did you say?
European Commission, yeah.
Have you got a representative from
We
this
have
country?
a guy called Lord Hill.
So he's representing us.
He represents us. He's never faced an election himself. He's an appointee to the House of Lords. He's then appointee to Brussels. Gets paid a good amount of money.
Then this goes to the Parliament. Whatever they think about here.
They then propose legislation. The Council of Ministers, the Prime Ministers and the like have to agree. It then goes to the European Parliament. We elect, but we elect on a party structure. So actually, I'd be really surprised if many of your viewers could name certainly two of their MEPs. They might be able to name one if they happen to know them, but I'd be really surprised if they could name two that represent their areas.
Not many can.
There's no connection. There is no connection in reality with people and European decision making. That's really worrying. There's no accountability, and there's no transparency as well. They're trying to make it as difficult as they can for normal people like us to understand what's going on.
So what is this special status we have got now out of 28 countries? We've been told we've got special status, but I can see we haven't gained the power back from Brussels. We cannot ban the benefit totally. We wanted to ban the child benefit, child living abroad. We couldn't do none of those. So what is the special status we have?
The special status seems to be...
Is this one of those political games?
It's a little bit like when we talk in America about having the special relationship. You know, these are words, they're fine words, but you actually got to decipher what it actually means. The one thing that they've said is that they've accepted that there are allowed to be more than one currency within the EU. So i.e. the euro, and we're a member of the pound. We said we're never going to join the euro, which is a good thing. But how long is this going to be for? Because there's a thing called the 5 Presidents Report. And this is the daft thing. The European Union has 5 presidents. I mean, not even one. It has 5. Can't even decide. But these 5 presidents have got together and talked about pushing power closer to this political union. And that's something that we're going to have to be part of. And actually, you know what? There's actually a case that they should be allowed to push closer together, because if you're going to have Germany and Greece, which are totally different economies, having a single currency, the euro, they need to actually get closer politically to make that work. We've said we're never going to be part of the euro. In my mind, we should just back off and say, you guys get on with it, we're going to go and do our own thing, but do it in a friendly way. It's not by an acrimonious divorce. It can be very friendly.
Paul, thank you. Viewers, it is time for another commercial break. Don't go away. We will be right back.